It is 2025. For a lot of people, that is the start of free-to-play challenges. For others, it's a new year, new accounts. For some, this is the first time playing Raid. But with so much to do in Raid, and so many champions, the questions often come up of what champions could be good to use. Obviously, there are many legendaries, mythicals, and even epics that are phenomenal champions. But the question comes down to, what rares could actually help us? In the early game and even mid game, rares can be a lot more abundant than any other champion. And so with that, today we are going to go through and we are going to look at none other than the Bannerlords and look through some champions and see how they can help us. To begin, we will start with one of my absolute favorites, Valerie. Now, why is Valerie good? Her A1 at first glance doesn't seem to do very much. Attacks a single enemy. Very simple. However, her A2 is probably the star of her kit. Increases the duration of all buffs on all allies by 1 turn. Also decreases the duration of all debuffs on all allies by 1 turn. And then places a 25% increased attack buff on all allies for 2 turns. When booked down to a 3-turn cooldown, this can be very vital in making sure that those buffs that you are placing on your team allows you to actually stay up longer than they normally would. Unless you have a high-tiered buffer on your team, it's going to be very hard for you to keep certain buffs up the entire time. Valerie helps by increasing that duration, and being able to keep on a 3-turn cooldown allows her to help maintain that a lot more. Her A3 also includes a shield on all allies. Now, it does say that the value of the shield depends on this champion's level. I do not know the actual details for how that works, but still, nonetheless, a shield is a helpful shield. And this heal that she provides also can be a life changer and a game changer in any ways that you use it. Next up, one that I like to look at is none other than Grandmaster. And it's because of his A1, attacks one enemy 3 times. One of the hardest bosses to fight in the early game is none other than that of the Fire Knight. With his shield that has to be taken down, trying to get enough hits in the early games can be hard. So having an A1 that is a 3-hitter right off the bat makes it so much easier. His A2 has a chance of putting a decreased attack, and his A3 has a chance for a provoke, so allowing for other uses in other content, so he's not just a one-trick pony. Now, it's not the best, obviously, being a rare, but nonetheless, it is still useful. Next one I would look at is Myrmidon. Myrmidon? The pronunciation is always a fun game in this game. His A1 has a chance of a provoke. It says here, if the target has a higher max HP than this champion. Well, he's a rare. Most of the time he's going to have a lower HP than most of them. His A2 is also going to put a decreased attack on everyone. And his A3 is the main reason why I consider him. Places Ally Protect on all allies for 2 turns, and a continuous heal on this champion for 2 turns. This books down to a 4-turn cooldown, and so it allows you to have a ally protection in the early games. This is very useful for clan boss. This is very useful for helping you get your teams through difficult waves and difficult bosses, because you can build him nice and tanky, and he will take, for a good chunk of the time, 50% of the damage that all of your troops are going to be taking. And with those continuous heals, he is going to be able to keep himself alive during it. He also has a fun little aura of 20% defense increase. It can only be used in dungeons, but when farming dungeons, that could be very helpful. Next up on the list, we're going to jump all the way over to Courtier. Now, Courtier, his A1, has a small 25% chance to freeze. This debuff itself is an interesting one, as it basically prevents champions from taking their turns and whatnot. But even on a small chance, it can be helpful in passing through waves and whatnot. His A3 is a 3-hitter with a chance of removing a random debuff from the target. Once again, you can take him into Fire Knight, being able to go through and use this to help take down the shield, and having that freeze for the wave-based content. But his big thing is his A3. Attacks all enemies twice and has a 33% chance of placing decreased speed. Now, 33% might not seem like a big amount, and in reality it's not. But having decreased speed, especially the big version of it, on a 4-turn cooldown for a rare is very helpful. There are a lot of bosses where having decreased speed can be a big game changer, because it means you don't have to build your champions as fast because you're slowing them down. So any form of getting it is helpful. Next up, we get to go to none other than Quaister, whatever you want to pronounce it as. Now, he is interesting in that his A1 inflicts 30% extra crit damage if he has less than 50% HP. Well, this might not help you right off the bat, but for a longer battle, it could help, especially on a go second team where in the arena where you might not have the speeds necessary to hit them right first. His A2 places increased crit damage on all allies if his attack is critical. Easy enough. Build him with 100% crit rate and he's going to boost the crit damage of everyone simply. His A3 attacks an enemy, books up to 100% chance of removing 2 random buffs from the target. Now this is the big reason why I like this guy. Simply put, 4-turn cooldown, chance of removing 2 random buffs. In those early stages, for example, when you're taking on I believe it's the Magic Potion Keep, and the boss keeps throwing up that shield and that block debuffs, having someone who can guarantee that they can take off those buffs is very helpful. You build him with some accuracy, 100% crit damage, and he'll be able to do some decent damage for a rare. Next one I want to look at is none other than Spymaster. Besides the fact that he is arguably one of the coolest looking rares in my opinion, his kit starts out with an A1 that has a 40 books up to a 60% chance of decreasing the duration of 2 random buffs on the target by 1 turn. Now, that's pretty good for a rare. A 60% chance of being able to just decrease 2 random debuffs or 2 random buffs on the enemy team. It can throw so many of the comps and the setups that are out there off balance, and it's on an A1, so putting him in counterattack gear, whatnot is very helpful because of that. His A2 attacks everyone and places block buffs for 2 turns. On 4-turn cooldown, it is only a 60% chance, but being able to put those block buffs can be the difference between losing and winning a match, a round. It does not matter who you are fighting. Some of the buffs they can put out there can literally change the course of the entire game. And then, of course, his A3 books down to a 5-turn, puts counterattack, and books up to 100% chance of putting a provoke for 1 turn on 2 random enemies. Okay? Now, the part I don't like is the fact that it is random. You don't have a control over who he is going to provoke. But still, 100% provoke with that counterattack, which once again is going to have the good possibility of decreasing 2 random buffs. It's a wonderful combination. And the fact that he is HP based means that you don't have to worry about trying to get a high attack. You can help him stay alive with his high HP, and that's going to increase his damage. Next on the list is none other than Conqueror. Now you might wonder, what does Conqueror have to do that could be useful? Well, A1 is a double hitter, could be helpful in things like Fire Knight and whatnot, but his A2 attacks an enemy, removes 2 random buffs from the target. So we talked about how with Spymaster he could decrease the duration. This guy just removes 2 random buffs from the target. You will need accuracy, but the fact that it just does it means that unless you weak hit, he is going to, if he has enough accuracy, he is going to remove 2 random buffs, which once again is a phenomenal way to throw a wrench in anyone's plan. Any enemy teams can have something completely thrown off by simply losing a buff. Now the A3 attacks an enemy. Enemies killed by this skill cannot be revived. Okay? A block revive skill is arguably one of the sneakiest and most deadly things when it comes to PvP and Ice Golem. With Ice Golem, you can kill off the little ad guys that are there to help lower the chance of getting hit with a freeze. And in PvP, I mean, for most of us in the low game, losing a champion's bad, but even losing a champion and finding out that, oh hey, you can't get them back, can change an entire thing. So he's a fun one to use in those earlier moments. From there, we are going to check out Halberdier. Halberdier? Halberder? However you want to pronounce it. This guy, his A1 has a chance of placing Weaken for 2 turns. I mean, it's an okay A1. But his A2 attacks an enemy, ignores shield and block damage buffs. Very interesting times where that could be helpful. But nonetheless, you never know. If you face someone in the arena with block damage, you're not going to have anyone who can ignore block damage. That's a rare, besides I believe this guy here. Being able to ignore shields is another phenomenal thing, because you're able to ignore the shield on the Magic Keep Potion spot, and anywhere else where you'll see shields and block damage. And then his passive automatically increases his crit damage by 40%, which, I mean, if you compare him to it, most people, they start, 57% crit damage, increasing it by 40, that puts them up there to a 97% crit damage. Now, that's just incredible for a rare right off the bat. I don't know the statistics for how hard he hits, but still, you give anyone enough crit damage, and they can start doing some honest-to-goodness damage to the enemy team. From there, we will go to Riskarm. Riskarm's an interesting one because he has a stun on his A1. Small chance, only a 30% when booked. But his A2 attacks all enemies, places a shield on this champion for 2 turns equal to 20% of their max HP. So right there is, a decent shield considering it. And then his A3 places counterattack on a target ally for 2 turns and increase defense on all allies for 2 turns. Well, you choose where you want that counterattack on. Whether you want it on someone who can hit really hard with the A1, or even with him having that stun on the A1, and the fact that he self-buffs himself using defense and gives his team defense, albeit it's a small version of it, he can still be very useful in messing around with waves and whatnot. We are next going to look at none other than Steadfast Marshal. Now, at this point, we are looking at Void champions. Now, it can be a tad bit of a touchy subject because Void shards are naturally harder, but if you do manage to get someone like him, it's not the end of the world. His A1 has a 50% chance, books up to 75% chance of provoking an enemy for one turn if the target's HP percentage is lower than this champion. Well, he's an HP-based champion, so you're not going to be using him against bosses, but for lower content stuff, being able to provoke people because you can just build his HP higher than what you'll find for most can be pretty useful. His A2 places the big version of increased defense on him for 2 turns and then grants an extra turn. Now, this does mean it's only up for 1 turn technically because the extra turn drops it down, but still having something big like that can be helpful. And then puts a veil on all allies except this champion for 2 turns. Now, it's not a perfect veil, so doesn't have as good of benefits, but still, nonetheless, being able to put a veil on everyone except this champion forces the enemy to target him. So you build him really tanky with a lot of HP, and then he can put up this increased defense, and then on a 3-turn cooldown, he puts a veil on your entire team, and now the enemy is forced to basically hit him. You're looking at champions like Duchess. You're looking at champions like Glaykid, who are legendaries who tend to have skills like this. And you don't see something like that very often. Even for Hydra, he can be a good way of helping for whichever head it is that requires a veil, I believe. Whatnot. He can be good for content where you're just trying to keep your allies alive. Next up, we're going to look at Dagger. Dagger has an A1 that hits 2 times, and each crit decreases the target's turn meter by 4%. So you can build her with 100% crit rate if you want and decrease some turn meter, only by 8%, but 8% could be the difference between getting your next champion to go first before an enemy or throwing off maybe a speed tune on the enemy team. Her A2 attacks everyone, has a 50 books up to 75% chance of putting the big version of decreased defense for 2 turns. Now it's on a 3-turn cooldown, and it's a solid skill. There is an issue of the fact that it's only at a 75%. And for spoilers for a future video, there's a rare in the Barbarians faction who is a farmable rare who has this at 100% instead of 75%. The difference is that champion is Force Affinity versus Dagger is Void, so you're not going to have to worry about weak hits. It's a pros and cons for both, but honestly, I used Dagger for a long time on my main account, even for Clan Boss, and it's because of the fact that she brings that, but also her A3, which attacks an enemy, has a 50 books up to 75% chance of putting the weak version of decrease attack for 2 turns, and then has a 50% chance, books up to 75, of putting the strong version if they're under decreased defense. And so with it, you could do the A2, put decreased defense on them, and then put the big version of decreased attack as well. Now, with, I believe it's a Sniper Mastery, you can bring that up to an 80%. And, it's one of those that you play around with the question of, would you rather not have a weak hit, or would you rather have 100% placement the entire time? And there's an argument for both. In the end, do what you feel is best for your account. But nonetheless, she can be useful in so many spots. And last but not least is a brand new one, relatively, from the time of this video being recorded. He's only been out for a couple of months, I think. And it's Denid the Tusk Knight. His A1 has a 40% chance of provoking for 1 turn. Well, decent A1, you know, being able to provoke can always be fun. But his A2 attacks everyone and places the big version of Strengthen on all allies for 2 turns. Book down to a 3-turn cooldown. Strengthen is phenomenal because it mitigates damage. That is 25% damage mitigation right there. So that's going to help your team stay alive. And if you manage to run him at a 3-2 speed compared to the rest of your team and the enemies, he's going to keep that Strengthen on your team the entire time. And then he has his passive where it places a shield on this champion for 2 turns equal to 10% of this champion's max HP when hit by an enemy under a provoke. So his A1's going to be provoking people. And when they're provoked, they're going to hit him. And so every time he gets hit, it's going to give him a shield equal to 10% of his max HP every single time. And so that's going to help mitigate some of the damage that he's going to take. Now, with that, we have 12 different epics here that can be very useful. That's not to say they're game breaking. That's not to say that it's a necessity to go through and, 60 all those. Most of these people I would only take to level 40 or level 50. In some cases, you could even argue taking them to a level 60. But ultimately, the point of this video is not to tell you who to upgrade, but to show you some options for some rares that can help your account. It doesn't matter how far along you are, there's always a use for rares. Even in endgame content, you will hit secret rooms in the Doom Tower where it'll ask for rares only. Or there's I believe it's in the extended missions or for the daily thing, you're required to use a rare on, I think it's Clan Boss, and then also in Faction Guardians. And so some of these can be used. For the longest time, Valerie was one of the champions that was recommended for one of the best Clan Boss teams out there. If you use the Infinity Shield team, Valerie is a very simple option because she increases that buff. And so a lot of people have used her for that. No matter what it is, you're going to be able to find some help and some use from these rares. Now, please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video or if you found it useful. We appreciate it very much. And in the comments, let me know if there's any rares that I skipped over from this faction, or if there's any rares that I put on the list that you think otherwise. I'm very interested to hear everyone's opinions. I haven't used all these rares. This is just from looking at them and from what I've seen and tested myself. So if you have any comments or thoughts on it, please let me know. Appreciate it. This is going to be the first video we do. After all, there's, I believe, 15 factions, and so we've got a bunch more videos we're going to go through, going through each individual faction, talking about which rares can be useful. No matter what, it's going to be fun. Thank you all for joining me today. And keep on raiding.